Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, constant reader Scott Daly, and I'm joined, as always, by my twinner from the West Coast. It's Travelin' Matt Freeman. How's it going this week, Travelin' Matt?
It's going good. I don't really understand what it is to be a twinner yet, so I don't know how to how to repartee with you here. But yeah.
I mean, it's just look. All it means is that if I die, you die, and I think we both know that's the truth.
Okay. This
week on the show, it is new book day, Matt. We are starting our next novel. Our how many is this in the season now? I don't know, like fifth, something like that. We're going to be spending the next few weeks reading Stephen King and Peter Straub's The Talisman, and that all begins this week when we read the entirety of part one of this novel, which includes 5 chapters and an interlude. And I'm so excited about this book, Matt. This is a book that I've been looking forward to discussing with you for a very long time, because I think, as we'll get into here in a bit, I think this poses a unique challenge for us in our Stephen King analysis, because, as you heard me say there's another name on the author line for this one.
Yeah, we've got a dual author work, which is going to throw all sorts of wrinkles into our usual method. I won't just be able to say, like, what I think King is doing here is because we don't know. We don't know, is this a story decision of King's? Is this a line written by a King? Sometimes you feel like you can guess that it is, but that's not reliable. So it's going to be really interesting.
It is. I mean, I think the trick here, the thing that has not steered us wrong, is to speak with confidence and a surety, even though you have no idea what you're talking about, and people will believe you.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Yes, appreciate that.
I think I just made up a word. Is a surety a word? I don't think that's a word. Assuredness?
Scott, speak with confidence and a surety.
I am speaking with confidence and a surety that I am right about everything.
Excellent word ability.
Yes. Before we get into the Talisman, though, I just wanted a brief, quick announcement here. It's not really an announcement, but just I wanted to circle back with you about the book Matt, that we read last week. We got a lot of great feedback from people about this book. Some people liked it more than us. Some people liked it less than us. I wanted to talk about one of the emails we got really quick with you, though, because I thought this was an interesting read on the story and worth bringing up on the show. So we got an email from someone named Brooke, who basically said that they saw this kind of transition in the book from, being about authors and the obsessiveness of seeing the works of other authors to the obsessiveness of seeing the being able to see newspapers from the past, from the other world, and moving into being able to see the future and moving into being specifically our character going to save his girlfriend Ellen, as kind of King trying to show that this is a journey of the guy going from being obsessed with books and reading to a person who rightly decides what the most important thing to him in life is his girlfriend Ellen. And so, we are moving from perhaps as bookheads, if that's a phrase, we see this as moving to the least interesting thing. But I think that's part of the point, is that it's like you're moving from the thing that you're obsessed with to the thing that should be the most important part of your life, which is the love of your life.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, that's interesting. I think that's in there. I can see that.
I do think even under that read, I still think the book doesn't quite dramatize that. Like I totally agree that's there, and I hadn't seen it until Brooke pointed that out to us, and I really like that idea. I really like that a lot, but I don't know if the book totally pulls that off. Yeah,
I mean, I certainly didn't feel that as like a character progression. Mm-hmm. It makes sense logically, though, as you lay it out. So.
Yeah, and I think Don's kind of disappearance in the book serves that as well, right? Because why does Don disappear from the story as well? Because he goes away on a weekend with his children, and so he's exiting the story to do the thing that is most important to him, and we're kind of seeing Wesley do that as well. Not that Wesley's going to stop liking books, but he recognizes the importance of Ellen, and probably won't get pissed at her for getting mad at him for reading a book while she's talking to him.
Yeah, it kind of takes this character for whom books are everything, and thus his inadequacy as an author is an all-consuming failure, mm-hmm. and says books are not everything. Yeah, you haven't written anything, and you probably won't, but that doesn't mean you're a failure. You can do this important thing, and do the right thing here.
I don't know if we talked about this last week, but let me ask you the question real quick here. Do you think Wesley is going to write a novel ever? Like we leave him behind in the story. In the hypothetical future of Wesley, is he ever going to write a novel?
I feel like, especially with this new framing that our listener has given us, I'm going to say no, and that's supposed to be okay.
Yeah,
like it's not supposed to be like because he's a failure. It's like no, like he's gonna have a full life being an English professor and being a husband, probably maybe being a father at some point.
Sure,
and like that's okay. He doesn't need to do this thing that he's obsessed with.
Yeah, no, I like that. So that is our last little brief discussion on again, a story that I didn't like very much, but definitely still a lot of stuff of value in there. I think there was a lot of things that I really enjoyed that conversation. I don't know about you, but I had a lot of fun talking about that book.
Yeah, it was fun.
But not as much fun as I'm going to have talking about this book, because it's time, Matt, to begin The Talisman. So some background information on this book a little bit here. The Talisman was originally released on November 8th, 1984. This puts it in our Dark Tower timeline just a couple of years after the publishing of Dark Tower 1, The Gunslinger. So Eddie Dean, The Doors on the Beach, and everything that follows the journey of Roland and his quartet is only just the faint sparkle in Mr. King's eyes. It doesn't exist yet. It's not there.
Yeah, that is. I'm kind of shocked to hear that. Because so many of the familiar concepts from the Dark Tower are present. I almost can't enumerate all of them. The one that jumps out the most is this idea of twinners. But obviously the Midworld connection is also there. There's just so many. We'll enumerate them as we go. But this just seems like such a quintessential Midworld novel to learn that it, I don't know, as far as I can tell, originated Midworld. Like, I don't know, is there another novel chronologically that has any of this otherworld stuff in it? Any of this specific, Stephen King expanded universe stuff? Yeah.
And I do just want to say here that I do find it interesting that you have made the early decision here to decide that the territories and Midworld are absolutely the same place.
Well, so I thought about this, and I'm going to proceed as if they are the same place until there's like, okay, let's just have this conversation up front.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah.
From a Doyleistic point of view, what probably happened is Stephen King had a specific idea for a specific story about another world, which is anchored in Narnia, Alice in Wonderland, every other story about another world, and with a lot of those tropes built into it. And then over the years, because he enjoys doing this thing where he connects his stories to each other, he kept connecting back to this idea of another world. And eventually, that other world became what we now call Midworld. That is what I think happened, historically speaking. What, insofar as the territories is Midworld, it's like, well, Midworld wasn't the thing yet.
Sure.
The territories, I think, is what Midworld is going to be, That is my actual opinion.
Yeah, no, I like that. And I think it goes back to your surprise at how much of this is fleshed out in the Dark Tower, if you are correct in your assumption. And I think that's a little bit chicken and egg, right? It's fleshed out in the Dark Tower because the Dark Tower looked back on this book and said, I'm going to make this part of my whole thing.
Yeah. Yep.
I think, as we said at the top, the most notable thing about this book is, of course, that it was not written by Stephen King alone. The novelist Peter Straub also is listed on this book. And the story goes, apparently, that King met Straub when he lived in London for 3 months in 1977, which I don't know why he did that. I don't know why he was just in London for 3 months, but he was over there. Both he and Straub were big fans of each other, and so they were hanging out and talking, and they originally floated the idea of writing a book together, but nothing really came of it. Then later in the early 80s, Straub moved to the States, and his presence there kind of reignited these talks, and so they ended up writing this book together. I want to say at the top here that, I am a constant reader of Stephen King. I am not a constant reader of Peter Straub. I have read exactly 3 of his books. 2 of them have Stephen King's name on them, and the other is Ghost Story, which we read for a podcast just last year. So that is the full extent of my experience with Peter Straub. So I am not going to be an expert of saying this is definitely Straubian, right?
Yeah. I have a feeling that we're going to spend up, a lot of time discussing what might be Kingian and what might be Straubian.
Uh-huh.
I feel like we both have a pretty good sense of King style at this point, and I feel like I at least have an inclination of what Straub's style is, but I don't know. That's the thing. It's a little bit dismissive and I guess backhandedly critical to say that, like, oh yeah, I can tell if Stephen King wrote something. It's like, well, he's a very good writer. I'm sure he can pick up a different voice if he wants to.
Definitely. And I think that's the interesting thing about this book. And actually, I did a lot of digging and wasn't able to find a lot of concrete, data about their writing process and what they did, who did what, with the Expanse series of novels that is written by two men that are going under the same pen name. There's this very clear delineation, right, where one author writes one character and the other author writes the other character, and they flip back and forth. And so you can see that clear delineation. There's nothing out there that I was able to find that says exactly how they broke up the book, who did what, how they did it. The only thing I found is just a little thing that I have no way of verifying this, but saying that King was intentionally trying to write Straubian in some ways, and Straub was intentionally trying to write in King style in some ways. So does that mean every time we see something that it feels like Stephen King, that's actually Peter Straub, and vice versa? I don't know. And I think I'm kind of excited about this, because I do think this is going to be a unique challenge for us. We're going to have to deal with this, or maybe it's not. Maybe it doesn't actually matter at the end of the day which of these two men wrote that particular line we're talking about. It doesn't change our analysis and our enjoyment of the story.
Yeah. It's funny. You're reminding me that I have co-written things with people at different times, and I don't know how to finish that sentence because there's too many different. But like it's actually an incredibly complicated process where you can't really say where one person's thing began and the other ended, because there's very often this back and forth of like of like kind of yes anding, and it's like when you sit there and you yes and for 2 hours of story crafting,
sure,
who is responsible for the end product.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like with a writer's room on a television show or something, the entire room is breaking the story,
mm-hmm.
right? But they kind of take turns and assign individual writers to be the one that actually takes all this stuff and then goes into the room and actually punches the keys.
Mm-hmm.
And so, is that what was happening here? Was one of them responsible for actually sitting down at the keyboard or the typewriter? I just don't know. But there's an infinite number of different permutations of how two people write a book together, and
right.
I think it's fun that they kind of, as far as I can see, didn't talk about it too much, other than it was a good experience. We did it together and we liked it so much we did it again, which is the book we'll be covering after this one.
Yeah, well, it'll be fun for us to speculate wildly on how that process went, though.
Sure, absolutely. So before we get into the book proper, we of course have a couple of quotes that start the beginning of it. These are not poems this time, Matt, but they are excerpts from Mark Twain's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. I'll read the quotes here, but I think generally the content of the quotes is less important right now than why the authors chose this particular book. So the first one is, well, when Tom and me got to the edge of the hilltop, we looked away down into the village and could see 3 or 4 lights twinkling, where there were sick folks, maybe, and stars over us were sparkling ever so fine, and down by the village was a river, a whole mile broad, and awful still and grand. So that's the first quote. And the second is just, my new clothes was all greased up and clayey, and I was dog tired. So those are our 2 Huck Finn quotes, Matt. Any guesses on what these are doing here and why?
Well, I want to deduce that we're going to be reading some kind of coming of age tale, somehow adjacent to Huck Finn. I mean, the boy's name is Sawyer, Jack Sawyer, like Tom Sawyer. So there's clearly meant to be a connection on the literary level, which is very Dark Tower, by the way, of course. It's just very Stephen King.
Sure.
Beyond that, I mean, that's where I'm going to start with for now.
No, I think that's a fair assumption, and I do think these first 80 or so pages do kind of prove out that this is going to be a story that is dealing in a lot of different things. You know, it definitely has. We're going to talk about all the Campbellian parts of this book. You already have referenced Narnia, but there is a lot of like American novel, you know, traveling, journeying. Huck Finn is a story about a kid kind of just bouncing around the South, right? I think I haven't read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn in a very long time, so I might be wrong about some of this, but my understanding is he kind of just bounces around different states and experiences different things, and it's almost a series of vignettes of this character just experiencing different things and learning and coming of age in a very specific kind of way.
And okay, you kind of reminded me, like, another thing about that is it's about the kid, but it's also sort of about America,
yes,
or
yes.
or at least about this particular part of America, and that time and place.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we have in front of us is a story where this boy is going to literally cross from East Coast to West Coast across the United States.
Yeah.
So we have the opportunity to have a story about America.
Yeah.
Again.
The fine tradition of traveling across America stories that you and I specifically have read so many of.
Yeah.
Like this is not a thing that authors shy away from. We really like these traveling stories. And and to be fair, I do too. I really do.
Yeah, like beloved American writer Neil Gaiman, for example.
I mean, Peter Straub, I believe, is British as well. So what's up with these Brits coming over here and writing about quintessential Americanism? Get out of here.
I just love how great our country is, I guess.
I mean, I think honestly what it is an outsider perspective on some stuff that we take for granted is sometimes really necessary.
That's true. I mean, I think we do take for granted the fact of the United States of America and the fact that it's this enormous single country with all this variety across it. And, you know, I haven't traveled within the United States as much as I would like to. And it's frankly, like you said, it doesn't seem all that special when in reality, if you, it is pretty great.
Yeah. I mean, it's wild that you can go from one ocean to the other and still be in the same country. Like it's crazy.
Yeah.
And it's a huge country that is, you know, you're absolutely right, filled with different states and different cultures and different people, but also all America. It's not entirely unique in that way, but there's not too much else like it out there. And I think that's why it attracts authors so much.
Yeah. It's a special little place.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, let's begin our story proper. We begin part 1, which is titled Jack Lights Out. I'm wondering, you know, just briefly what you thought about, if you gave that any thought before you dove into the content itself on what that could possibly mean.
I took the phrase, I was pretty sure in advance, means like Jack departs, Jack leaves.
Yeah.
And so that was... once I understood this was a boy, he was in a place, I was like, all right, he's going to leave the place.
Okay. Just making sure. I didn't know if you were going to go crazy with it. That is absolutely what it's doing for sure.
Okay.
So we begin chapter 1 of our reading, titled The Alhambra Inn and Gardens. And I want to read the opening words of this chapter because I think this is a really good tone setter for what this book is going to be. On September 15th, 1981, a boy named Jack Sawyer stood where the water and land come together, hands in his pockets of his jeans, looking out at the steady Atlantic. He was 12 years old and tall for his age. The sea breeze swept back his brown hair, probably too long, from a fine, clear brow. He stood there, filled with the confused and painful emotions he had lived with for the last 3 months, since the time when his mother had closed their house on Rodeo Drive in Los Angeles and, in a flurry of furniture, checks, and real estate agents, rented an apartment on Central Park West. From that apartment, they had fled to this quiet resort on New Hampshire's tiny seacoast. Order and regularity had disappeared from Jack's world. His life seemed as shifting, as uncontrolled as the heaving water before him. His mother was moving him through the world, twitching him from place to place. But what moved his mother? So, first of all, I love this writing. I think it's really evocative, and I'm instantly in this book. But do you think this sounds Stephen King-y? Does this feel like a Stephen King opening to you?
This part did not. So, you know, there are parts later on, where I will bet 90% confidence that those are written by King. Mm-hmm. This is part where I would bet against, but only maybe, you know, 60 to 70%, I guess. Yeah.
It's interesting because, again, I've other than these two books, I've only read Ghost Story, but the experience I had reading Ghost Story was like, oh, I get where this tone and rhythm of writing came from in the Talisman now, because I think Ghost Story, it was a perfect book for us to read to kind of get a crash course in Peter Straub, because it is just very deliberate in its tone and its style of writing. Like it has this very, very different feel to it. And it's like, I was thinking about how to describe the difference between Straub and King. And I think the best way to do it is maybe take the metaphor that you've used before, where it feels like when Stephen King is telling you a story, you're sitting, at a bar with him. That's probably a bad example. We've used that example before, and it remains a bad example. But in this hypothetical, you're sitting at a bar with him having a drink, and he's just casually telling you a story. That's the feel of the way he writes narrative a lot. This is something different. This is it feels a little more formal. It's less of, casually chatting and having a story, where more of maybe someone is sitting at the top of a lecture hall telling you a story.
Yeah.
And the writing, like, I'm not saying that's bad, not at all. It's just a little different. I think this is closer to the Gunslinger and the tone of the Gunslinger than it is to the rest of the Dark Tower.
Yeah. I really, as soon as you said that, the image of like a college lecturer kind of pacing back and forth at the front of the classroom, giving a comfortable off the cuff lecture, but nonetheless a lecture.
Yeah.
With well ordered thoughts and paragraphs, and not the sort of almost stream of consciousness that King can get swept up into in a way that works really well. So yeah, that is a great like handle for the difference between those two styles. I like that a lot.
Awesome. So we meet our protagonist, a boy named Jack Sawyer, who finds himself at, as we said, the Alhambra Inn and Gardens on the coast of New Hampshire. We'll talk about Jack more in a second, but I wanted to start our analysis here talking about this place. We're basically at a summer resort boardwalk-ish town, complete with this big amusement park, and there's this old Victorian hotel they're staying at. But it's not the summer. We're in the fall. And so this place is basically dead. There's no one there. Half the shops are closed down until the spring, and everything's dead and dying. And I think that's important to, set up early here, because death is actually this ever-present motif at the beginning of the book here. Like, one of the lines our character says very early is, "There was too much death. The world was half made of death." This idea, this linking of the kind of dead resort town to the death that has filled Jack Sawyer's life, I think is really, really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that was what jumped out to me, especially at the very beginning of the reading, was just how much this place sucks. And like, I think that like that's my favorite background element of the story, is how badly this town sucks and everybody in it sucks except for Jack's new friend that he makes.
Sure.
The concierge being the outstanding example of somebody who sucks. But yeah, like the whole town, the whole environment has this like sick, diseased vibe. Like it's like one of those Lovecraft towns harboring some terrible secret.
Sure.
And you're visiting it, but you get the feeling like everybody's staring at you whenever you look away. I don't know if anything is going to come of this, or if it's literally just like a vibe that is a fun horror tone to strike, but it's really powerful anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important that we have this ever-present feeling of death, and we have a character that's going to be traveling from one coast to the other, and this is almost the coast of death, and he's going to be heading out west to hope. And so there's some comparisons we can continue to make there as we go through.
Yeah.
I also just want to establish this here, because in this part I pulled, that part where he says the world was half made of death. The next line in the book is, "The gull cried out overhead," and this is great because these seagulls become like a constant refrain throughout this early part of the story. Like, we see them again and again and again. They're directly interacting with Jack in a very real way. And I kind of just love that we firmly established that here. We have this line saying the world was half made of death, and then we immediately cut to a seagull, which is life technically, but this gull represents something much more insidious in the pages to come.
It's funny. I was grasping for the connection, and I just made the connection that Roland calls seagulls buzzards of a different color or something like that, because they're always like following him around on the beach when he's rotting from the inside out from his blood infection.
Sure. Yeah, I love that.
So like just that connotation of seagulls, I think is great.
So we learn that Jack and his mother are here hiding out in this dead town. They're running away from Jack's father's old business partner, a man named Morgan Sloat. And Matt, has there ever been a more perfect villain name than Morgan Sloat?
No, there is not.
It's just so perfect, right? It's just like when you say it, you're just like, oh, this is a bad dude.
Yeah.
Yeah. We learned that Jack's mother was a famous bee movie star. They called Queen of the Bees, we're told here. Fairly successful in her day, but like the place that they're currently inhabiting, she is kind of now out of season and in the end of her career. And we learn here that she is dying, physically, literally dying.
Yeah. We learned that, yes, in a way that's like very cagily delivered and like we're not really sure, and it's confusing and ambiguous. Honestly, I was just confused about that. I was like, am I supposed to think that she's just definitely dying, or am I supposed to think that he's being paranoid? And then by the end of the week's reading, I was like, okay, she's definitely dying. Toward the beginning of the reading, I was more confused though.
Yeah, and I do think that's intentional. I think Jack is kind of running away from that reality. He's trying not to admit that his mom is dying, but that keeps coming through. And then I think we see from his mother, Lily, she is, trying to run away from her own death as well. So one of the things she's definitely doing is not talking to her son about the fact that she's dying of cancer. So I think it being kind of weirdly introduced and being you're unsure of it, I think that's intentional because none of the characters are really facing that fact. And kind of the big moment at the end of this week's reading is them both admitting to each other almost without saying it again that yes, she is dying and yes, she needs help. And perhaps he is capable of being that help.
Yeah, makes sense.
So there's a lot of stuff going on very early in this book, Matt. As we said, the tone of the place that they're in, but also the text itself is just so dour and oppressive. Jack is this 12-year-old boy that knows his mother is going to die, and he feels powerless to do anything about it. All he can do, as we see, is just like token gestures, like he's handling the breakfast, he's ordering the food for them, he's the one carrying the bags, and these are things that at the end of the day, as compared to what her problems are meaningless, but it's the only actions he can take. And I was wondering what your opinion on the early kind of tone and pace of this novel.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I want to make sure that that what I say isn't construed as a criticism of the book. It's just an observation that the start of the book is this depressing, dreary, frustrating slog.
Yeah.
And it's not like a slog in the sense that it's a chore for me to read, but it's a slog for the character. The character is like wading through molasses, confused, doesn't know what to do. Everything around him is hostile and confusing, like hostile in a confusing way where it's like, I don't even know what that means. And I guess it is a slightly frustrating place to be in as a reader. I mean, I found, just to be specific, I found it really difficult to write my share of the notes for this week's reading because it's basically all table setting, and it's that position I'm always in toward the beginning of a book where I'm just like, yep, this is a thing, and I it's probably going to go somewhere, and that's all I can really say about it. But there's enough kind of mystery in the air to keep me hooked, though.
Yeah, I agree, but there's very little, like, I think I am hooked as well, but there's very few actual hooks. Like, it is a very interesting choice to start a book this way. Like, we kind of, it doesn't last too long because we move from this into his meeting of Speedy, which directly kind of kickstarts the plot and gets our character out of the funk and the haze he's been in. But it is very interesting to go into a book and just be like, for the first 10 pages, we're just going to kind of have him like as this completely powerless, uncertain of what to do. It works. It's very functional in that it gets you into the mindset of your main character. But I agree, it's not like this is a book where you're immediately pulled into the world right away, because it is kind of holding you back in that we feel danger from everywhere. Like he's dealing with death and dying, but of his mother and his father and his uncle, his father's best friend. But also like there's other stuff going on, and the book is like being very shady in how much of that it reveals to you. Like there's almost a magical realism going on at the very beginning where like we're not even sure if we're in a magical world yet, and yet there's weird stuff going on and we don't know what to make of that. And so the book is just not doing you any favors as far as, giving you a clear path forward through all this stuff. It waits to do that a little bit. And so I can understand maybe the frustration, but also the difficulty in really getting your head around what this book even is.
Yeah. It went on. I was confused for longer than I prefer to be during the beginning of a book, but I'm pretty sure by the end of this week's reading, I was like, all right, I get it. I get what we're doing.
Sure.
So, yeah.
So I really love this little detail here early where we learn that they're here at the Alhambra Inn because this is where Jack's father took his mother. She was nominated for an Oscar one year, like her first and only big critically acclaimed role. She got nominated for an Oscar, and even though she didn't win, she had a lovely time here, like celebrating with just her husband. So lovely, in fact, that we learn that this is where Jack was conceived. And I love that the book calls this place his essential beginning. I love that line so much, which of course is perfect, right? Because this is also going to be the place of his next beginning, his transition, as he literally crosses a threshold into a different world and goes on a journey and does all this Campbellian stuff that's about to happen.
Exactly. Yeah. It felt like a very King line indeed.
Yeah, that essential beginning. Yeah, it's so good. Like it's one of those lines that seems effortless, and it's like you read it and you're like, oh, that's the perfect way of describing that. It gets the exact emotion across that you're trying to get there. One of those ones that I immediately took out my highlighter and was like, yep, I love this. I love this.
Yeah, I agree.
So as we talked about earlier, Jack, like the world around him, is a bit in a haze, a bit of a daze. He doesn't feel like he's really there. It reminded me actually of what Eddie Dean says about their time existing in between book 4 and book 5 of the Dark Tower, where he kind of says that I think he says time is God, I can't remember it, like a ripple on the water or something. I can't remember the exact line, but I remember starting Wolves of the Calla, Eddie Dean kind of talking about how it seems like time has just kind of stopped and then it kicks into gear again when the book starts. And here Jack is just kind of lost in a bit of a daze, but things kick into gear again when he meets Speedy Parker.
Yeah, right. He's been passive and now he has to be active again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love, again, gonna be a lot of quote reading for me across this book because I just love this writing so much, but I like this. It was true. He was not on hold anymore. Just an instant before, he had seemed to be wrapped in wet wool and cotton candy, and now he was set free. A silvery nimbus seemed to play about the old man for an instant, a little aureole of light which disappeared as soon as Jack blinked. For the first time, Jack saw that the man was holding the hand of a wide, heavy push broom. So this is great because obviously he experiences something profound when he meets Speedy, but the book kind of goes beyond that and says it's not just, oh, here's a new person, and sometimes just new people entering your life can kickstart your life in a certain way. The book also immediately frames this as magical in some way. We see this silvery nimbus floating around Speedy, and we're immediately kind of starting to realize that here in the Campbellian form, here is Speedy Parker, a wise old mentor that is meant to put our character on his path. And this is what I mean about like this, the periphery of magic, almost the magical realism going on here that just after this point kind of shifts into directly just magic. I love that looseness with its playing with what's going on here. Who is this person? Is he just a guy? Am I imagining these things? Like, you just don't know.
Yeah. I think that I kind of correctly pigeonholed what trope we were going with here pretty quickly. But
sure. Yeah, it's not subtle. I mean, like, I feel like you can pull out the hero's journey and literally like check every box as we go through this week's reading alone, and we're only at the very beginning of the story. So I get that, but I do just love, like, because it's not just the hero's journey, right? It is absolutely that, but we're playing in some other things as well. And so he's kind of like you talked about, we're taking the hero's journey, but we're taking this also, American road trip idea and layering those on top of each other in an interesting way.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think that's a good point. Like, this is sort of the Americana wise old wizard, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's almost like it's the hero's journey in a fantasy context, but then we've taken all of the fantasy trappings and replaced them with Americana trappings,
Yeah,
which is interesting because maybe when we go into the other world, they're going to be fantasy trappings.
could be. Yeah,
We're going to like
we'll see.
mirror and or juxtapose the fantasy version of a thing with its real world equivalent or something like that.
Yeah, that could be. That could be. Speaking of our wise old mentor that could be a wizard, I'm just gonna say here at the top that I really enjoy Speedy as a character, and I know he technically falls into King's tendency to create these wise old semi-magical to directly magical black characters, something he absolutely does again and again and again. And the more Stephen King you read, Matt, the more you will see this. But outside of his tendency to fall into that trap, I do think Speedy is this kind of wonderful combination of a person that makes himself come across as just like a simple, hardworking guy, but also with this air of mystery, this quaintness married with this otherworldly quality to him. And I love these characters like Speedy who give you a little bit of a hint of a world much bigger than the one you're living in, but like they won't tell you the full scope of that world. And indeed, almost on some level, like enjoy the fact that they know about it and you don't. Like there are moments where Speedy seems to be like enjoying himself in how he's vaguely gesturing towards things for Jack. I find it so alluring. I really like it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think it's funny in my position because, well, I mean, first of all, we just watched the Shining TV miniseries. And so my brain just, immediately juxtaposed this character with Dick Hallorann, who has like exactly the same role in that show. And he's the supernatural black man who is the mentor of the character. And so I had these scenes like very strongly juxtaposed in my mind. And so I was like, okay, yep, King does that. That's a thing.
Yeah, that is very true. Yep. And I can go ahead and say it won't be the last time in season 2 you see a character like this for sure.
Yeah.
I think several actually. So yeah, I mean, not the best tendency of his. I think it's just kind of it's aged poorly, especially. But I mean, to give him all the credit he deserves, I do think this is a kind of very fleshed out, interesting character. He's just definitely falling into that. You're right. He's exactly Dick Hallorann.
I think that the main thing that distinguishes him from Dick Hallorann is that later in the story he's actually a bit more firm with Jack. Yeah. A bit more like, this is your quest. This is the mantle. You have to do it. Like you're going to do it. I'm going to shove you out of the nest and you better learn how to fly on the way down,
Yeah.
Which is kind of not something that I would see like Dick Hallorann doing specifically.
Yeah. And we have to talk about this because there is some Ka related stuff going on here, right? Near the end of the chapter, we get this again. Uncomfortably, Jack had his old sense of being directed, of being manipulated, as if a long invisible wire had pulled himself and his mother up to this abandoned place by the sea. They wanted him here, whoever they were. And so we're kind of like, this is, I don't know if you remember, but we had the same conversation in Insomnia, right? Where our character Ralph was directly feeling as if he was being pushed and prodded and manipulated towards a certain outcome. And here we have it again with our protagonist in this book. And this lines up very perfectly with the Dark Tower and the sense of Ka and the greater sense of the movements of the multiverse, or the omniverse, if we want to call it that. That there is some greater power pushing and prodding and pulling characters, and true to a Stephen King character, they feel that on some level. They seem to have some greater awareness of that manipulation. Yeah.
It remains to be seen whether we'll go, in the direction that we've gone before, where the story is very front and center and explicit about the idea that you've got supernatural powers of fate, Ka, but fate tugging on you and literally making you do things. We'll see what direction the story takes that.
Absolutely. And so we move on to our second chapter titled The Funnel Opens, which is very ominous. Chapter 2 begins with Jack having a nightmare about his mother dying, which we're told is once again reiterated to us that is something that is actually happening in real life. She is dying. He leaves the house in the morning unsure of what to do, and attracts the attention of a seagull eating a clam. I just love the writing here, Matt. Like the from an outside perspective, this is just a bird eating a clam. And anytime a bird is looking your direction, just because of their dark, beady little bird eyes, they just look like they're staring into your soul and just want to murder you, because birds are really scary. But I love this. I love how King and Straub do this, that they're just taking what is, just a bird eating a clam, which they do every day, and really packing on the disgust and the discomfort of what's going on here. The way the clam like stretches, and I think the way Jack almost hears like the screams. It's a clam, right? It has no nerves, it has no brain, but the screams of a dying clam as this bird is like ripping apart his flesh. And as he's doing it, staring directly at Jack, it's just really wonderful.
Yeah, it's some good horror, and the language in this part really soars. I love this bit.
Yeah, definitely. So Jack flees, runs away from the bird and from the truth as he starts trying to convince himself that his mother is fine. Actually, she's not hurt. She's fine. She's absolutely fine. But of course she's not. And so the otherworldly things follow him to where he runs, and he's just standing there, and suddenly there's like a whirlwind in the sand. And back to the writing, there's this. More sand collapsed inward and began to spin. Now it was not a dimple, it was a funnel in the sand, a kind of reverse dust devil. The bright yellow of a gum wrapper was revealed, covered, revealed, covered, revealed again. Each time it showed up again. Jack could read more of it as the funnel grew. J-U, then juicy. The funnel grew and the sand was jerked away from the gum wrapper again, as it was quick and rude as an unfriendly hand jerking down the covers on a made bed. Juicy fruit, he read, and then the wrapper flapped upward. So that's Stephen King, like 1,000% that this part was written by Stephen King. I have no doubt in my mind.
Yeah. 100%, definitely. It's an explicit brand reference. It's gotta be Stephen King.
Well, it's not just that it's a brand reference, but you're absolutely right. But like his propensity to take a detail, like what's happening here is there is a magical funnel of sand being created, right? Like it doesn't make any sense. And we learn here that at the center of this funnel will be an eye of that creepy gull that was staring at him earlier. And yet the way the text chooses to describe this completely otherworldly event is by taking a thing as mundane and normal as a juicy fruit gum wrapper and showing the movement of the sand via the perspective of the growing ability to read this wrapper on this branded gum. And it's just this incredibly Kingian like mundanity of like, I'm gonna show this completely otherworldly thing through the perspective of the most plain, boring thing, which is a gum wrapper.
Yeah, just it's a great technique to ground the supernatural in the extremely banal. And that makes it feel more real, more immediate.
Yeah. So as we said, at the center of the spitting funnel of sand is an eye. It's not the eye of the Crimson King, Matt. It's not red. It's a black, beady eye of the gull that was staring at him earlier. Or maybe it is the Crimson King, Matt. Maybe it is.
Yeah, it is. It is.
I mean, functionally, no, but
well,
because the Crimson King didn't exist when this was written, but also, yeah, sure, why not?
It depends. Like if this is really the force of great evil that's trying to scare the shit out of him, then somehow it's got to be connected to the Crimson King, because it's all connected to the Crimson King. Mm-hmm. Again, that was all made up later, so we just
yeah. I mean, I need to stop saying this, because the fun of this is how it's all connected. So we can just go ahead and declare here, with absolutely no evidence to prove it, that yes, this is the eye of the Crimson King. It's just making himself, just like he made himself look like a catfish for Ralph, he's making himself look like a creepy seagull.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly.
So the eye in the sand speaks as well, Matt. It speaks to Jack and kind of allows him to revisit the death of his Uncle Tommy, who was hit by a car in what was definitely just an accident and not murder. And at the end of the chapter, we will learn that the voice that he hears coming out of this funnel in the sand is that of Morgan Sloat, his friend Richard's father and his dad's old business partner, the bad guy, guy.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
What did you think of this in general? Like, this was, it's some weird stuff to be happening, but did it work on you?
Well, yeah, it did. So I was thinking about this because I was like, this is one of those things where it could be hallucination, could be dream, could be vision. Those can be very kind of empty because it's like there's no consequence. It's literally just imagery, and then the character moves on, and there were never any real danger. But I think Stephen King is an author who actually knows when and where to use dreams and visions and things of that nature, and they always, as far as I can recall, they've always worked for me, and this one also works for me as a like it's successfully creepy even though there's sort of no stakes, right?
Yeah, it's just I think the thing that works most about it is it doesn't make any sense. Like, if it is real, right, and this is real, like, magic shit just fucking with Jack here, why is it a sand funnel with a seagull eye coming out of it? Like, it's almost terrifying and monstrous in its absurdity. Like, why would you do it this way? Oh, because it's really fucking scary, that's why. And that makes it work even more.
Well, it's the kind of, so okay, what I should have said a minute ago is, like, I don't feel too confident that it's the Crimson King, because it actually, I'm not entirely confident that these visions are bad, like, because they seem to be telling him to do what he needs to do, which is like act on the fact that his mom is sick.
Yeah. Because I mean, every time he rejects the call, which we're not going to be the last time we say that, something magical happens to kind of push and prod him and allow him to realize things.
Yeah. So that's actually why I don't think it's the Crimson King. It's because the gull, while it is definitely creepy, I don't actually know that it's his enemy.
Sure. I mean, it has not attacked him, that's for sure. It just kind of freaks him out.
Right.
Yeah. So Jack rushes home to check on his mother, can't find her, and has a bit of a panic attack, realizing that she's gone. Of course, she was just in the other room and just didn't hear him at first. And I think this is great, because this is a setup for a later beat in which she will be gone when he goes into the room, and then of course then he will be gone. So we're doing kind of a 3-beat here. But I just like the bit where he's so incredibly worried about his mother that, like, her not being there causes him to almost completely shut down.
Yeah.
So the two of them go out to dinner, and Straub and King spend a lot of time on kind of really establishing what this mother-son dynamic is. We see that she's back to smoking again, and he's aware of it, and it makes him worried about it. We see, like, that she's kind of wasting away. She's lost weight. And I really love this interaction between Lily and the waiter. She's ordering, and she says, ice in a glass. She said, olive on ice, Tanqueray gin over olive. Then, are you getting this? Mom, for God's sake, can't you see his eyes? You think you're being charming. He thinks you're making fun of him. Can't you see his eyes? No, she couldn't. And that failure in empathy, when she'd always been so sharp about how other people were feeling, was another stone against his heart. She was withdrawing in all ways. So I love the observation. He's so observant of what's happening with her and other people around her. And the other thing that I thought was interesting is lots of eye imagery going on here, Matt, in the early parts of this book. We have the eyes of the gull pointed out very directly, both in it looking at him and then the eye appearing in the sand. We have this reference to can't you see his eyes. We have later references to the eyes turning yellow on people that were about to grab Jack. There's a lot of very specific eye imagery going on early in this book.
Yeah, good eye for spotting that. I guess it's this is also a good time in general, specific to this interaction, to point out how much great mother-son stuff is happening. This is sort of the beginning of it, but it's honestly my favorite. I think it's my favorite part of this book so far, and it's obviously one of the complicated mother-son relationship is one of Stephen King's favorite topics to write about.
Yes, definitely. And I mean, we talked about how the opening of the book didn't feel very Stephen King from a stylistic perspective, but like in the substance, this has Stephen King all over it, right? Because it's a young kid with a strained relationship with his mother, a father who's out of the picture. These are, I mean, we're back in Low Men in Yellow Coats again, and not just that in many other books. And I think you're right. I think Stephen King, as we've said before, raised by just his mother, father not in the picture. So he has, he has a lot of insights and a lot of complicated feelings about the relation, the solo relationship between a mother and their son. Of course, King had a brother as well, but still he has a very specific angle on this whole thing, and
Mm-hmm.
so it's not surprising to see another character and a set of characters who are really exploring this complicated relationship. And I think it's important to point out that this is a different relationship from Bobby Garfield and his mother, right? They had a different dynamic, and this dynamic is, I mean, it's almost unfair to compare to anything because we meet them in such a troubled time. We don't get to see them in like what normal life looked for Jack and his mother before all this stuff started happening.
Yeah, I mean, what's funny is I still feel like they have a better relationship than
yes.
Bobby and Liz Garfield, because
Mm-hmm.
Even under stress, they're kind and loving to each other. The other thing about this reading you pulled out is the recipe for the drink she wants is basically just gin.
Yeah.
It's like, isn't the end of the recipe literally tap the bottle of vodka to the glass or something? Like,
I think it's the
silly.
vermouth, right?
Yeah, something like that. So it's like, and I don't know. Maybe I'm overdoing this as like a judgment, but it's like the subtext here is like she's just drinking straight gin.
Yeah.
Which maybe is a clue as to her like level of just like, fuck it, I'm just gonna check out. I mean, I guess if like, is this like lunchtime anyway? Is she ordering like a martini with lunch? I don't know.
Yeah, basically.
So,
well, no, I think they're specifically going out for dinner.
Okay,
so
that's not so bad then. But anyway, I still think there's some subtext about just like she's having a straight up martini at this dinner with her son.
And I mean, it is very interesting because we're told she's a woman of Hollywood to go back into her. This is a book about America. This is a character who is not famous, but not hugely famous. Like Queen of the Bees is a very specific type of thing, but she's not like, I think there would be a tendency to write a character like this who is like this aging Hollywood star who is like, it still thinks that she's the superstar that she was, and treats everyone else around her like she needs to be constantly doted on. And there's a little bit of that here, right? There's a little bit of like, you kind of see that version of Lily come out here where she's kind of being dismissive and rude to the waiter a little bit here in like not treating him well. And we're kind of specifically told by the story that this is unusual for Lily, that this is not the way Lily normally behaves, that she actually has this great ability to empathize and to understand and to see people and would not normally act like this. And so we're playing in this trope of the aging starlet who's kind of a jerk, but we're specifically told that is not the norm. And I think it's really interesting that we do that.
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely.
Cool. All right, moving on to chapter 3, and it's time to talk about Mr. Speedy Parker a little bit more. The next moment, Jack wakes up unsure of what to do next, which is, I think, a refrain that we're going to hit a few times in this book. He's not in school. His mother hasn't bothered to enroll him in school because she doesn't have his vaccination card, something that was like, oh, yeah, you need that in 1984, but in 2022, we probably have like a whole big fight about it for some reason.
I don't know what you're talking about, Scott.
So Jack just wanders around, eventually deciding that for some reason the answer to all of his troubles lie with this amusement park janitor that he met the other day, Speedy Parker. But before he does that, he decides to go try to get some food. So he walks into a restaurant in the hotel called the Saddle of Lamb, and immediately a woman says, "Table for one." The woman in charge of the Saddle of Lamb during the day had materialized behind him and was already plucking a menu off the stack behind the reservation book. Changed my mind. Sorry. Jack escaped. The use of escaped there is really great. I pulled this out just because I think this is another example of like, Jack is not processing the fact that his mother is going to die, and he will be alone. And so this idea, like basically what just happened here is he walked into a restaurant thinking about eating. The woman said table for one. It spotlighted to him what could possibly happen after his mother dies, that he won't have anyone, table for one person. And he immediately gets the hell out of there because he's just not ready to face that at all.
I think you're exactly right. I feel like I didn't pick that up in the moment. I didn't understand why. Honestly, my mind jumped to like the reason why he is escaping is just because he's so keyed up that like it's just like everything is spooking him. But
Sure.
I actually think that your read is way better and more accurate.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I think you're still right that he is really keyed up right now, and everything is kind of freaking him out. Like everything. Like we don't see. That's the interesting thing. Outside of Speedy and his mother, we don't see a lot of other people talking to Jack in this town, right? And every time someone is talking to Jack, it's a negative interaction. Like it's either the clerk at the hotel being nasty to him and him being nasty back, or this woman just asking him whether he needs a table and him getting the hell out of there. He's so isolated. He's only got, 2 avenues of conversation and any kind of companionship.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I have to read this part, Matt. A gull screeched, a wave bounced hard gold light toward him, and Jack saw Uncle Morgan and his new friend Speedy as figures almost allegorically opposed, as if they were statues of night and day stuck upon plinths, moon and sun, the dark and the light. What Jack had understood as soon as he had known that his father would have liked Speedy Parker was that the ex-bluesman had no harm in him. Uncle Morgan, now, he was another kind of being altogether. I love this because it is just so transparent and obvious, right? The book is declaring itself very specifically here.
Yeah.
This is a story about the battle of good and evil, and we have our representative characters here of each. And the duality of this thing is very important, right? We have night and day, we have moon and sun, we have West Coast and East Coast, we have Earth, and we have the territories. Like there's a lot of doubles of things happening here.
Yeah, absolutely. That everything in this story so far is about duality and things in their opposite, and then he is a character who doesn't have a twinner. And what does that, what does that mean thematically? I don't even really have a guess yet because I don't know where exactly we're going with the concept.
Sure.
Another thing that I was thinking about a bit during this is like we have a situation where there's a young man who is the inheritor of a estate whose father has died, and that inheritance is going to be stolen from him by an evil man. So this reminds me very much of Peter and Flag in the book that we just finished up, the Eyes of the Dragon, where Peter is the rightful king and Flag is the evil vizier. So, clearly they're very different. Uncle Morgan is a very different character from Flag, but he's also another fun kind of like believable evil. And quite evil too. Like he's not. King sometimes will write sort of an ambiguous character where it's like they're flawed, but they're not evil. They do bad things, but they're not a monster. And when Morgan seems closer to being a full-on monster.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about him in the interlude chapter. But I think you're right. It is interesting that it's not that we're supposed to pity him, but I do like that Straub and King take time to kind of understand what his base problem is and what leads him to become this monster.
Yes.
But I think he definitely is.
Yes.
So traveling Jack catches up with Speedy, who seems to be almost waiting for him, which is totally normal. He starts singing to him, hinting about what he's going to have him do next, which I find the sing-songiness just delightful here. We also get this weird moment where Speedy says he met Jack before, and we'll circle back around to that later. But it's just one of those. This is what I meant when I talked about him earlier in the show. Is that just like it's almost if he's having fun, just like fucking with Jack's brain a little bit here. Like, why would you say, "Oh yeah, we definitely met before," but it was back in like 77 or something like that. And wait, when I was 7, what? Huh? How? I mean, what he's doing is he's really pushing Jack to recall these things and to face the idea of the territories or the place that Jack calls the daydreams, right? Because we kind of learn here that the daydreams is something that Jack experienced a lot when he was younger and has since stopped that. And so I think that's what Speedy is doing here in his clever ways of just like bringing stuff up, but not like telling Jack about it. He's trying to get him to turn his brain on and focus on remembering these things. And we see here that it does eventually work.
Yeah, it makes total sense because if Speedy just walked up to him and told him all this stuff, he'd be like, "You're crazy, get away from me." But he prompts him to remember it on his own, and then he's the one who keeps coming back to Speedy. Like that's that's one sort of halfway complaint that I had, is like he keeps like, how many distinct conversations with Speedy are there?
Yeah.
Where he'll like talk to Speedy, then leave, and then talk to Speedy, then leave. And it's like, well, I think that's because with each time he talks to him, Speedy gives him a little bit more to chew on, because he has to warm him up to this idea. And I think it honestly wouldn't work if Speedy just persuaded him in the course of one conversation.
Sure.
He has to persuade himself.
Yeah, I'd agree with everything you just said there. I do think it did not bother me. The structure of these chapters did not bother me while reading it, but while putting together the slides and kind of summarizing the events of this week's reading, I was struck with just how much everything is. Jack talks to his mother and leaves that conversation worried and wanders around, bumps into Speedy, has a conversation with him, rushes back to his mother, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, until finally he leaves. Like, that is it's something that doesn't really show up to me as repetitive until you actually just write it down in a list like that. Like, while I was reading it, I didn't mind it at all, but there's a lot of spinning our wheels in these 80 pages for sure.
Yeah, I think it's a testament to the quality of the prose, that it didn't really like, maybe it felt a little bit draggy, like I said earlier, but I was enjoying it anyway, you know.
Sure. So Speedy takes Jack to his office and shows him a photo of a place he calls the Territories, another world, a world of two-headed parrots, men that fly with their own wings, and men who turn into wolves, and of course a place of sick and dying queens. Trouble everywhere, son. Sick queen, maybe dying, son, and a world or two waiting out there, just waiting to see if anyone can save her.
Yeah. So obviously the Territories is the place we now identify as Midworld. But, you know, as we were saying before, also obvious, like, we're drawing on these ideas of Narnia. Like, I think Alice in Wonderland was a connection that I was thinking about, because there's this drink, there's this potion basically that Speedy gives him, which is we never see anything like that. We never, you know, the only way in or out of Midworld that we've been privy to is through either magical doorways or through techno magical doorway wormhole portals. But the idea that you can just drink a bottle, or even, I think it's implied strongly to or maybe even stated it beyond being implied, is that Jack doesn't even need a bottle of anything. He can probably just walk between worlds at will, if he figures out, or if he remembers how he used to do it, you know. So, but all of that is, you know, it's just interesting to me to consider, and I think we're going to have plenty of opportunity to consider as we go through this book, how Midworld as a setting was sort of spawned from this genre conscious reference to other stories about other worlds, like Narnia, like Alice in Wonderland, you know, portal stories as they're sometimes called.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot, and you're totally right. I do think it's funny that obviously, like, I coughed at the reference to the two-headed parrot, because for those that maybe didn't pick up on that, the Flag's parrot in The Eyes of the Dragon is a two-headed parrot, and I think that is indeed a direct reference to The Eyes of the Dragon, because I don't think we've stated this directly yet, but these two books came out in the same year. In 1984, both The Eyes of the Dragon and The Talisman came out. So we're dealing with a character, or to a writer who has probably just finished putting the finishing touches on that book when he's writing this book, and so he's having some fun making some direct references there.
Very fun. Yeah.
So it's good time. It's all good.
Yeah.
All right. So Speedy wants to show the Territories to Jack. He wants to take him over there, but Jack has to reject the call a few more times, because that's what these stories say they have to do. So instead, he runs home to check on his mother. On the way, he does finally trigger the memory of where he has seen Speedy before. And what we see here is basically when he was a boy living over in California, these two men showed up in this green car. That's all he can remember about the car, that it's green. Everyone reading this book with us is probably like, was it flashy though? What were the rims on the car like? Because the two men in this car were told their eyes while they were grabbing him changed to yellow, and in their hand it felt like they had like a claw or a jointed talon or something to grip him with. So then we see at the last minute that Jack is saved by someone. That someone, of course, ends up being Speedy. So Matt, this is before the low men existed as a concept at all. But I mean, it seems rather low men-esque, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, very much like the low men that we know and love. Maybe not quite as alien as the the real low men. Maybe these guys are more lesser coffin hunters. I mean, honestly, again, if we step back from it, it's just like, yeah, this is sort of an early version of how King saw the low men. And if we step back even farther from it and say why is this a thing that King has decided to put in all of his books? This idea that there's men in ugly, brightly colored coats in flashy, ugly cars who drive around and seem to disproportionately be stalking boys or the old men who are friends of boys. And I think it's playing on a fear that kids have of like basically adults being predators, being adults being monsters. That's I don't know if we ever actually said that when we were talking about low men in yellow coats, because there was a lot of stuff going on in that story. But it seems like that's the reason why you would have these. This is basically a type of important monster in the Stephen King universe. Is what are they? Are they a werewolf? It's like, no, they're basically dudes who drive around in bright cars, and they're trying to steal you.
Yeah. And to be clear here, like we don't. We're told it's a green car, right? Like we don't have any other details. So I don't even think we know if like they're not wearing yellow dusters. Like that is definitely true, because this is not the low men in the literal sense, right? But it is another example of him taking that. You're right, that concept of men showing up in a car and taking people and doing evil. And I think you're right. That this does tie into this very childish fear of, a fear that I think we instill in children, right? Because what is the one thing that Jack says in this memory is that like he's been told like this is a bad idea to talk to strangers, and he knows his parents would be mad at him if they find out he's doing this, but also he can't help it because they got the candy and they're in the car, so like he knows he can get away before they could get their hands on him, and of course he's 100% wrong on that. So yeah, the world is a scary place, man. And especially to a kid, like, because you're kind of simultaneously told to defer to adults in every situation, while also, oh, by the way, though, some adults are really bad and you need to stay away from them. And it's like, how do I navigate that? I don't know. And so the result is kind of just fear. And that is, I think, absolutely something King is tapping into here. Yeah.
It's interesting because that's true. And I remember being afraid of adults, of strange adults, because it's like they could do anything. You don't know. But I also remember thinking that if an adult ever tried to grab me, I would just kick them, and that this would almost certainly just cause them to stagger and fall down. Because, and it's funny because my kids have said similar things where I'm like, they'll just say like, yeah, if anybody tries to grab me, I'll just kick him. And I'm like, wow, I totally remember thinking that and having a very clear image that would work. And now that I'm an adult, I almost just want to be like, okay, kick me as hard as you can. And we're just, like I'm not trying to scare my kids or anything, but just I want them to have a more realistic sense of the danger of various situations. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right, because it's the same error that Jack makes here, right?
Yeah,
this underestimation of the strength of a person, and I think it comes from your own estimation of your relative strength, right? That like, especially when you're a kid, you feel powerful and full of energy and invincible, and the idea that there's someone out there more powerful than you, you don't want that.
Yeah, it's very like, it's just, there's nothing intuitive about like, what's it going to look like when I get into a scrap with somebody who weighs 4 times more than me. Like there's no real frame of reference for that.
Sure. So as we said, Jack absolutely would have been captured by these men who would have done who knows what, but Speedy shows up in the nick of time to save him, only to immediately disappear again himself. I'm curious about your reaction to this and this part of the story. There's a lot of questions being asked here, right? Like, who is Speedy? Why was he here? What's going on? Why were these people trying to take Jack? The story is not willing to answer any of these questions yet.
I mean, my main reaction was to just kind of be like, yeah, it's Ka. Yeah. And, you know, the specific mechanism of like, what exactly is Speedy? It's like, is he a man who has the shining? Is he some kind of supernatural creature in human form? Are the beams sending people messages in dreams? Or, you know, it's like, I don't know, like, it doesn't really matter at this point. The book may explain to us the actual mechanics of this, or it may not. At this point, I think I'm content to just be like, yeah, okay, so Ka has arranged for Speedy to usher Jack into this adventure.
Sure. Yeah, I like that. So Jack heads back to check on his mom once again. This time he gets a call from our good friend Morgan Sloat. Jack decides to stay on the line, as I think every child has done at some point when you have more than one phone in the house, where you stay on the line to hear what your parents are talking about. Because like we talked about back in, I forget which book that was, but kids are nosy and want to spy, and that's just what they do.
Yeah.
So we learn here that what Sloat wants from Lily is to basically sign over Jack's dad's interest in the business to him. This is something that would normally go to his son, but he wants it. He wants all of the business, and he's willing to do right by them. He's going to make sure they're taken care of. He's going to make sure that Jack is going to get $50,000 a year to go whatever school he wants to. All this incredibly kind, nice stuff. All they have to do is sign the paper.
Yeah. So what this tells us is that Jack's dad's share of the business is probably worth at least 1,000 times as much as what Sloat is offering.
Yeah, I mean, we learn it's a million, like millions of dollar business, right? And Sloat has, you know, continued to make it, and he's got plans. He's got plans that involve the territories that we don't quite understand yet, but he's got them. But isn't it like the interesting thing about this is we know we get this sneaking suspicion that something's wrong with Sloat, that he's bad in certain ways. The book has kind of hinted at this, but like this, we haven't gotten the interlude with him yet to see the depths of his depravity. So this, like, we kind of don't directly understand. Okay, but why are you running, Lily? Like he obviously knows where you are. He called you at the place. So like, what has gotten you so afraid of this guy that you're running from him? And like, I don't think Jack fully understands how dangerous of a person this guy is yet. And so we're kind of faced with a little bit of his confusion here. It's like, what is he going to do to you? And what we learn is that, you know, everything, he'll be willing to do everything to get what he wants here. And so Lily never like says that out loud. She never like acknowledges how dangerous this man is, but obviously she's terrified of him, which is why she keeps running.
Yeah, it's interesting. Do you think that, I don't want to get a spoiler situation, but like I wondered, does she really believe that he's going to murder her, or is it more just like she knows that he's bad news and just wants to stay away from him? I guess after thinking about it, I would lean toward her realizing that he's actually capable of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the latter half of this week's reading really starts to zone in on the idea that Lily has a much greater understanding of the things that are going on than she's willing to admit to herself. Mm-hmm. So my takeaway from that is that, yeah, I think she is fully aware of who Morgan Sloat is and what he would be willing to do, and probably on some level knows he was at least in some way responsible for both the death of her husband and the death of her husband's best friend.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
So after this call, Lily says she wants to be alone, so she sends back out again, which, guess where he's going to go, Matt? He's going to go talk to Speedy again.
Go back to Speedy.
But I do like this line that closes out this chapter. I'd like to be alone for a while, Jack. Try to understand that. Try to understand that. Trust me. These things that grown-ups said, meaning something else entirely. Like I love that as, I did a lot of mental comparison of Bobby Garfield and Jack Sawyer this week because, the recency with which we read that movie and also the mother-son relationship. And Jack, when we meet him, is a little bit older than Bobby, but I think he's not just a little bit older, he's also a lot bit wiser. And like, I think he's clued into some stuff that we saw Bobby Garfield just slowly discovering over the course of that book. Like he seems totally understanding of a lot of this stuff already.
Yeah, I agree. This seems like a kid who has already kind of gone through a lot of those like evolution from childhood to young manhood events.
Mm-hmm.
And it's more like this is a young man who is being faced with his first real challenge of true manhood.
Sure.
So yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah.
All right. We move on to chapter 4, Jack Goes Over, and this, Matt, will serve as our exposition chapter because it's time for Speedy to explain what the hell is going on. Sort of.
Uh-huh.
I do love that this whole scene takes place in the middle of Speedy repairing a carousel. There's just something weird about like being in an empty amusement park while he's repairing this ride with, like, you can kind of imagine an inherent creepiness of it with all like the horses. I don't know. Carousels can be really creepy at times to me,
especially broken ones.
Yeah,
there's this because it's like a beautiful it's a beautiful sort of fairy tale thing, but then like somebody has ripped it open and there's like rust and grease and metal and wires spilling out of it,
Yeah.
So, but I'm, I was glad at this point that like Speedy's going to explain stuff because I think we've had 3 chapters of being confused and a little bit stymied and frustrated. And now it's like,
Sure.
okay, finally we're going to get explanations.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair. I think, they kind of hold it back from you for as long as possible, but eventually realize they have to explain some stuff. And that is what this chapter is.
Yeah.
So Speedy tells him that the dreams he had as a kid were not capital D daydreams, but rather he was actually swapping or flipping, as Jack will later call it, over into a different world, the world of the territories. He can do this because his father could do it and did do it often. And also his father at some point taught his partner Morgan Sloat how to do it. Jack kind of remembers this by cluing into some conversations that at the time made no sense between his father and Morgan, but now have some sense into them. I particularly like this part, Matt, where I think he's talking with Speedy about he doesn't know how to do it. And he starts saying it. He says, I don't know how, he meant to say, but a voice inside, a voice which came from that same previously locked room from which the memory of the 2 men and the attempted kidnapping had come this morning, rose up powerfully. You do know. You might need Speedy to get you started, but you do know, Jack. You do. And we learn that this voice is the voice of his father. And this strikes me. I brought this up because this strikes me as not only a very Kingian thing, but also a very specific Dark Tower thing, of having, we talked about this a lot during our journey to the tower, of having these voices of characters, especially fathers, in the heads of our characters. And whether, this is their brain manifesting this voice or just literally like through some magic, his father is talking to him or pushing, Yeah.
I definitely a very King trope, obviously.
Yeah. We also learn about the concept of twinners, people from different worlds that are connected in some way. The queen of the territories, we learn, is a twinner of Jack's mom. And I'm not sure I remember this properly. Do you remember if the Dark Tower novel actually ever used the word twinner? I think during our analysis, I used the word twinner, and I don't know if I was just doing that or if the book actually ever did that.
So I would have bet $1 million that the word twinner was in the Dark Tower. And when I saw this note of yours in the script that the word twinner was never in the Dark Tower, I tried to find it and tried to find any evidence that the word twinner was in the Dark Tower, and could not find any evidence at all. So either you did use it, or maybe it was in some other book that we read in the course of all of season 2, but I can't think which one it would have been. So I'm forced to conclude that it was not in any of these books, and it was just that you used it. But I know that I've heard the word before. So
I'm 90% sure I used it when perhaps I shouldn't have. because we do we are directly confronted with this concept in the later Dark Tower books, right? We have characters from Midworld twinning with characters from back in New York City. But as you were talking, I'm like frantically trying to bring up my PDFs of these books to search through them to see if the word twinner exists. Not in 7 or 6, not in the Dark Tower or Songs of Susanna. So that's wild. That is wild.
Yeah.
I kind of spoiled the word twinner for you here.
Well, I don't really care, but it's still, I'm still like amazed that it doesn't occur anywhere in Wolves, because that would be the one where you would expect it, right?
Yeah. I'm working on that one. I got no exact match. Boom. No twinner.
Yeah.
Because there's twins in Wolves.
There are some twins in Wolves.
Yeah. So twinner was never actually used, but that concept was used heavily in the Dark Tower, and here is where it is kind of gets its definition.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So we learn that the other thing about twinners is that when one of them dies, the other usually follows, not necessarily right away, but it is almost inevitable. So we learn that Jack has to not only save his mother, but also the Queen of the Territories as well.
Yeah. So the question in my mind at this point was, is Jack's mom sick because the Queen is in danger, or is the Queen in danger because Jack's mom is sick? And I actually assume the former. I assume that the Queen in Midworld is in some kind of danger. Maybe she's sick, I don't know, and this has manifested in our world as Jack's mom getting sick, and so Jack needs to save the Queen in order to save his mom. That's my assumption.
That is a fair assumption, sure.
And then I also was like, I wonder if the Queen's name is Gabriella Deschain, but
we do learn her name by the end of this week's
right,
reading,
we did.
And it is not. So sorry to disappoint you on that one.
Slipped my mind. That I didn't really think it would be, because that would be ridiculous.
Probably too much.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think the fun part about this is I didn't do this thing at the beginning of the episode, which is like this is why we're reading this book in season 2. I haven't said that to you. And while I think you're already starting to see some of the reasons why it is, I'm enjoying leaving it a little bit open to interpretation.
Sure. Yeah.
We also learn that Jack does not have a twinner, that not everyone has a twinner, because there are much less people in the territories than there are in our world. And so not everyone has one. Jack doesn't, but he's special. We learn that he's special. Mm-hmm. That is a special quality of him. And it seems like of his family, he's the only one, right? Because we know his father has a twinner and his mother has a twinner, because in the territories they married each other. That is what Sloat says in his interlude, that his father's twinner married his mother's twinner as well.
Yeah.
So,
and it seems obvious that Sloat has a twinner too, right?
Yes.
Well, yeah, at least. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Implied.
Yeah,
we haven't seen.
Implied.
Yeah. I like this part a lot. When had he last closed his eyes in this world and opened them in the magic world of the daydreams, that world with its rich, vital smells and its deep, transparent sky? Last year? No. Further back than that. California, after his father had died. He would have to have been about... Jack's eyes widened. 9 years old? That long? 3 years? It was frightening to think how quietly, how unobtrusively those dreams, sometimes sweet, sometimes darkly unsettling, had slipped away, as if a large part of his imagination had died painlessly and unannounced. I don't have anything to say here other than I think that's just profound and beautiful, and like this part of growing up is this realization of like, oh, I don't do the things that were normal to me even just a couple years ago.
Yeah. I mean, my comment here is, oh, don't worry, Jack. It just gets worse with each year, and the time passes more quickly. But no, yeah. I mean, like I distinctly remember the age where it became, where I just realized that I hadn't played with toys in who knew how long.
Yeah.
Like, and the thought of playing with toys was like, why would I do that? Why would I use my imagination to create whole worlds out of thin air when I could just play video games,
Yeah.
And so that is sad.
And it's so fascinating to me, because we kind of learn here that this is like flipping over and going into the world of the daydreams, as he calls it, was just like a normal, regular occurrence for him at some point in his life.
Mm-hmm.
And it is now 60 pages into this novel that the first time he's acknowledging that, because it's been 3 years, and in kid years, that's an eternity. And so he's kind of moved from that being a normal part of his life to that just literally being daydreams. Like he was just dreaming these things, and they're just at the periphery of his memory but he doesn't think about it very often. It just kind of invades his mind when it pings off some other random thing that's happening right now. And that is kind of Speedy's role here, is specifically causing those pings to escalate to the point where he can actually remember that this was a thing he did all the time once upon a time.
Yeah. I feel somehow this is connected to this idea we always talk about, where King has this magical ability to remember what childhood was like.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's related to this, where it's like, well, we all allow ourselves to become totally disconnected from childhood. And maybe Stephen King, he's still alive to that part of himself that did have that childlike imagination, and would disappear into another world, metaphorically, of course. Although I wouldn't be surprised to learn that Stephen King had access to some kind of magical doorway or something, honestly.
It's the only logical explanation,
yeah,
really.
It's like that Lovecraft story about the guy who paints the horrible things, and then you realize it's just because he goes to another world and sees the horrible things and then paints them.
Oh, man. So Speedy offers Jack a drink of the magic juice that will help him flip over into the territories. But of course, he's not done refusing the call once again, where he literally says, "Take this cup from me, Speedy. I don't want this." It's like I know it's not like, "Can you please take it back?" he asked, and his voice had came out in a strengthless whisper. "Please, take this cup from me, O Lord." That's literally what's happening here. I don't want this. I don't want to take it back from me. But Speedy refuses, because, as you said, he's being more forceful with him now. And with nothing left for it, Jack takes a drink and flips over to the territories. And so we get our first real image of what this place is like. And we see here that the ocean was still there, but now it was a darker, richer blue, the truest indigo Jack had ever seen. For a moment, he stood transfixed, the sea breeze blowing in his hair, looking at the horizon line where that indigo ocean met a sky the color of faded denim. So, we're obviously doing our Campbellian crossing of the threshold here, right? Although technically our quest hasn't truly started just yet. But we are already seeing something very important. The territories is just a better version of our world, right? It's more alive, more beautiful. Like we're told the ocean is bluer, the air is lighter, the smell's sweeter. Jack, while he's over here, finds some blackberries and eats them, and they are the biggest, juiciest, best blackberries that have ever existed in the world. And also we get this fascinating line here where it said the sun had a faint orange cast, like in those old medieval pictures. This is a world of betterness. It's a world of, for lack of a better word, it's a world of story. It's a world in which a story shows the best version of every possible thing. That it's brighter, it's happier, it's better.
Yeah, which reminds me a lot of Narnia, actually, because Narnia has this feeling of like everything in Narnia is better. Yeah, that's cool. The faded denim thing also reminds me, a little bit of the Gunslinger. Got this guy, this guy with his faded denim. It makes me just to continue on to try to shove this into the mold of Midworld. I feel like maybe this is Midworld before it started to move on. I don't think we've ever really seen a Midworld before it was moving on, and maybe it was this vibrant kind of better than reality place before it moved on.
Mm-hmm. I like that. Yeah, I like that. But all is not good in the territories, Matt, because that damn fucking gull is back again. In the territories. It's not a normal sized gull. It's huge. It's the size of an eagle, we're told, but it's just as unpleasant as before. It once again talks to him. And what's the deal? What's the deal with this gull, Matt? Is it just what we already talked about, or is there something more here?
It's a bad gull, or maybe it's good.
It's a good bad gull.
It's complicated. It's a very complicated gull.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I do think there's an important distinction here, though. Like every other time he's encountered the gull or its eye poking out of the sand, Jack has fled from it. He's run away. Here in the territories, the thing is bigger and therefore more dangerous than ever before. But in this instance, Jack doesn't run from it, but rather runs towards it. He challenges it. He tells it to back off, tries to shoo it away. He is direct and more forceful and more offensive than he has been before. And I feel like that's important. Like this is a place where perhaps Jack feels more comfortable in being that type of person than he did in his world.
Yeah, that's interesting. I like that.
So having seen enough, Jack drinks more of the potion, flips back to our world. We learn another important fact here, Matt. The territories is smaller. Is a smaller world. I think when he's looking out of the horizon, he sees a very distinctive curve because it's a smaller world. And we also learn that the 20 feet he walked over there was half a mile in the real world, which will be very convenient if, like, say, for example, you had to walk across the entire continental United States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, yeah, one begins to see the skeleton of a possible plot.
Sure. Which is exactly what Speedy tells him here after meeting back up with him. We're told that to help his mom, he has to journey to California to find another Alhambra hotel and retrieve the talisman that is found inside. This will somehow be the key to saving Jack's mother, although Speedy is being rather coy about how and the why and what to do. In fact, he says here that he's not allowed to tell some of these things, which is interesting, right? Jack asks who is telling you you're not allowed to do these things, and that's a pretty good question. What do you think? Who's saying he's not allowed?
Yeah, I was a bit confused because I was like, why write it that way? Why not just say that Speedy knows he's supposed to go there but doesn't know what he's supposed to do exactly? Mm-hmm. It's a very specific choice to say, oh yeah, I know what you're supposed to do. I'm just not going to tell you because I can't. Yeah. Like that's a different message. And I don't get it yet.
Yeah, it almost gets across the idea that, like, look, there are bigger forces at work here. Like, I am the one guiding you here, and even I can't tell you everything.
Yeah.
But I mean, this is a MacGuffin plot in like the purest form as well, right? To the point where, like, we're told the MacGuffin is a talisman. It's described as some small crystal ball looking thing, but we are provided no information about, like, how this thing could actually help in any kind of way. I mean, the answer is magic in some way.
Yeah. We have no idea. Yeah, definitely.
I do just love this idea as a plot. We've already talked about, the Americanism of it all, but this idea of going from one coast to the other, from one state of being to the other, as we're going to one state, like this dichotomy. We've already talked about the dichotomy of good and bad, light and dark. It seems like these coasts are both playing into that. And so far on the East Coast in this little New Hampshire town, we've seen nothing but death. And to the west is hope. And that is also, distinctly American, right? That ties into the American idea of manifest destiny, right? This journey westward as something that is very core to the way people in this country look at our manifest destiny, our desire to expand, and we could be very critical of that and how it was done, but that is something core to Americanism, I think.
Yeah. It's complicated, right?
Yes, it's very complicated.
It's interesting that the idea of the world expanding and the idea of the other world being smaller. I think there's maybe too many confused threads here for me to connect very aptly. But Midworld is a place where, as it moves on, it gets bigger physically, right? So like it started out small and perfect in a sense. And Roland talks about crossing a desert that took him like years to cross.
Yeah.
Because it was expanding as he was crossing it. And it's like, I'm trying to make some connection with, like, as you get older, everything becomes more spread out and disconnected. Mm-hmm. But when you're young, everything is clear and kind of in the palm of your hands. I don't know exactly. I want to kind of pull on this thread as we go because we don't know much about the other world yet.
Yeah.
It is funny. It is fun to me to imagine that, like, the reason the world moved on in Midworld is because Stephen King, his conception of what this other world should be, had to like expand and become more complicated and become more mature, and in doing so, it literally like fell from grace.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like there's some interesting stuff there. Maybe we'll figure it out as we go.
I think we will. I do think there's just one last interesting beat. The idea that has to travel from this coast to the West Coast. First of all, being sent west has a very specific connotation in gunslinger lore. I don't think there's any direct relation here, but I just wanted to point that out because that's in gunslinger lore, that's being exiled, and here he's forced to do this to save people.
Yeah, definitely.
But anyway, we're told that on the West Coast, when he gets to where he needs to go, there will be another Alhambra hotel, probably not named the exact same thing, but that's kind of what Speedy says. You'll have to find the other Alhambra, and inside the other Alhambra will be the Talisman. And I just wanted to talk about this because this is an interesting name used here, right? Like Alhambra, by the way, is a real place. It is an Islamic fort monument located in Spain. It was originally built in the 1200s, and it loosely translated means the red one, because I think the fort, the building was built in an area with a lot of red stone, so they called it the red one. There's another specific Kingian connotation for you there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, interesting.
But I mean, we have nothing else to work with on that. I just wanted to point that out.
Cool.
Yeah. All right, moving on to chapter 5, titled Jack and Lily. This chapter sees Jack return home to his mother again. But there is a really interesting part here that we see that I think is the most Huck Finn-esque part of the book, if we're trying to relate this directly to Huckleberry Finn. The clerk in the lobby of the hotel has seen Jack hanging out with Speedy, and he's clearly unhappy about it. Whether it's because Speedy is a black man, or does he assume there's something going on here that is homosexual that he doesn't like. He's very unhappy with Jack hanging out with Speedy. And Jack seems fully aware of that. Like we get this moment here where the pale clerk flickered behind the long desk, stabbing at Jack with his white eyes. A message was there. Yes. Jack swallowed and turned away. The message made him stronger. It increased him though its intention was only scornful. So I find this really interesting. First of all, once again, focusing on the eyes, right? Like his white eyes looked at him, which, I mean, you don't describe a person's eyes as white. I mean, people have white in their eyes. Yes, absolutely. But like, I wouldn't describe a person's eyes as white, but this guy's white eyes.
Yeah. That's really interesting, isn't it?
But I think to tie back to the Huckleberry Finn of it all, Huck Finn is I think, for its time, a very anti-racist book, where part of Huck Finn's journey into manhood is reckoning with this idea of slavery and of the way black people are treated. The character of Jim in that book is very specific to like him kind of learning who this person is as a person, and then seeing how other people treat him. And so I think we are maybe gesturing towards that a little bit here with the character of Speedy and the way this clerk is treating him for interacting with him. And, and I love the idea that like that made him stronger. Like this realization that this person is mad at you, is upset with you because of this absurd thing that you have, that message made him stronger. It increased him, though its intention was only scornful. Like this is, I feel like we're seeing a small change in Jack already, right? Like he's crossed the threshold for the first time, and here's a change already. And so the next time he sees the clerk, he directly confronts him. He's rude to this man, to this adult. He pushes back against the ugliness of the world.
Yeah, exactly. He's gone from, the initial tone of everything just being overwhelmingly horrible to, well, it's still bad, but he feels like he can stand up to it, which is a very different feeling.
Yeah, he has power. He has power to make change. Like that's a big thing about the early part of this, I think, is when we meet Jack, he's this character who's entirely powerless, who feels lost and confused because he's losing his mother, he's lost his father. There's no one there to help him. and he's completely powerless to do anything about his situation. And through the course of these pages, he has learned that no, he does have power, and there is an opportunity, there is hope, there is a solution to his problems, and knowing that empowers him in other ways, like we're seeing here.
Yeah, right. And it's the sort of situation where, like, if he stands up to the guy and it, and it works, then it makes you feel empowered to stand up to people in the future, right?
Yeah, 100%. So Jack finds that his mother is not there, and no one seems to know where she's gone. He does keep himself from panicking, and sets out to look for her. And I love this part so much. Then at one of the tables near the Alhambra end of the shop, he saw an old woman lifting a cup. Apart from the help, she was alone. Jack watched the old woman delicately replace the cup in the saucer, then fish a cigarette from her bag, and realized with a sickening jolt that she was his mother. An instant later, that impression of age had disappeared, but he could remember it. And it was though he was seeing her through bifocals, seeing both Lily Kavanaugh Sawyer and that fragile old woman in the same body. I love this moment, Matt. I think, we could attach magic to this if we wanted to, but I do think this is just this general idea of a child, and child's the wrong word, a son or a daughter, witnessing their parents get old and get weaker. And I mean, this is something that I've experienced, not quite like this, but like my dad was in surgery for his kidneys a couple years ago. And, seeing my dad post surgery, like in a bed, like the weakest I've ever seen him, is this real jolting moment, just like, oh my, like you're my dad, but you're also like an old man now. And it's just like, it's just this holy shit moment. And it comes and goes, right? Like where you see them from a certain angle or from a certain perspective, or see them do a certain thing, and the reality of their age catches up with you, but then they go back to like being dad or mom.
Yeah.
And they're just that same powerful, loving presence that has been in your life for its entire time. And the writing really, really spoke to me here.
Yeah, it fits in really well with the story that's so much about duality, because like there is this duality to the way we come to see our parents as we get older, where they really are, my dad really is always going to be dad to me. Like he is always going to be much bigger than me and much stronger than me and much more competent than me in some part of my brain. Yeah. Even if he's, an old man, and he's only going to get older,
Yeah.
And so there's always that duality, that bifocal effect.
Yeah, I love the bifocal. That's so good. Yeah. That's such a great turn of phrase.
Just a great turn of phrase to express a really powerful idea, like you said.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, just the general idea that like part of growing up is realizing that like now you are the caretaker, right? That's like the thing here is Jack is realizing that his mother is sick, his mother is dying, and it is his responsibility to make that better now. Whereas, up until this point, when he was sick, it was her responsibility to make him better. And that is a shift that's happening.
Yeah, sure. Definitely.
So Jack sits down with his mother, who calls him Wandering Jack in this moment, which is a misquote of the Traveling Jack that we learn here that his father used to call him, another thing that he's forgotten. We do get the idea that she's never used this phrase with him before, that like this was his father using it, and she's never used it. And so I think this is starting to lay the groundwork for where the rest of this conversation goes, that Lily was much more aware and is much more aware about the things that are going on than she lets on to anyone.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like also the forces of Ka are strong enough here that she's kind of being buffeted by them and maybe saying things she wouldn't normally say.
Yeah, possibly. And there are other worlds than these type of moment.
Yeah, very much that. Because I'm not really sure, like, does she know that, like, it like either your husband goes to other worlds sometimes or you don't,
Sure.
I guess the argument would be she's seen a lot of weird shit, but she's told herself she has a narrative that explains it away, but she also knows that it doesn't quite hang together.
I think you just kind of rationalize it away, right? You just say, okay, yeah, this is like I think Jack asks her some direct questions later in the chapter. Like, didn't dad ever like disappear for weeks at a time and you wonder where he is. Oh, he was on trips. Didn't you ever like walk into a room knowing for a fact he was there and then he wasn't? It's like, yeah, but like I was just wrong. Like you just learn to live with things and yeah, on some level you acknowledge that they're happening, but you just kind of push those down. And a lot of this chapter is both of these characters reckoning with the fact that they've been doing this, pushing this stuff aside or pushing it down for so long that it's begun to eat away at them. I mean, maybe that is what literally is killing Lily is cancer, but what is perhaps killing her is her refusal to acknowledge this whole other existence that is in this world.
Yeah, that's interesting. I like that.
So Jack tells his mother he has to go away for a while, but that he's going to save her life, so not to worry. I'm curious what you would do, Matt, as a parent, if your 12-year-old kid walked up to you and said, I got to go. I'll be back, maybe a couple weeks. I don't know. I'm not even really asking for permission. I'm just telling you this is how it's going to be. Okay, bye.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be like, hold on, let me call the doctor and the police. Yeah, like her accepting reaction of this really tells us that she does sense or know or understand something unusual is happening.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many bits and pieces of this incredible writing that really clues us in on that. I like this one in particular. I want to try to save your life, he said. Is that all? I can do it. You can save my life. That's very entertaining, Jackie boy. It ought to make prime time someday. Ever think about going into network programming? She had put down the red smeared knife and was widening her eyes in mockery. But beneath the deliberate incomprehension, he saw two things: a flare-up of her terror, a faint, almost unrecognized hope that he might be able to do something. He might, after all, be able to do something. I love that. I love that, speaking of duality, this idea that she's putting on this brave front, but underneath that she's two people. She's the first person is one that is absolutely terrified by what is happening here, but the second is one that maybe for the first time is allowing themselves to have some hope that they might not be dying here.
Yeah. I mean, I think this stuff, the mother son stuff, is the best part of the book, and the complex psychological kind of sort of double think of his mom's situation and his own sort of denial as well. And the interplay of those two things. This is really subtle and just delightful character work.
I mean, it really is. And I don't know which of the two wrote this. I do think stylistically this still feels a little bit more Straubian, but like the character work here is just vintage Stephen King. It's just the depth, the deftness and the assurity with which these characters are being painted and explored and poked and prodded at really early here in the story is just absolutely delightful.
Yeah, I love it.
And it goes on, right? Because this conversation, like, we're not going to cover the whole conversation in detail, but like, it's just a moment of reckoning between these two characters. There's so much that's been unsaid between Jack and Lily for so long, and they're both finally acknowledging it and showing it and saying it. Like, just even the fact that she finally admits, as much as it's possible for Lily Sawyer to admit, that she is indeed dying. Like she doesn't come right out and say it, but she is, and Jack says it. He says it to her, and she kind of admits it. They both acknowledge that this is a thing that is happening, which is the first time we understand has happened in the story, in their lives. I also really like this part too. His mother had agreed to his going. She had given him permission to take his journey, and as he walked through the crossfire of the Desmond's glare, he finally understood why. He had not mentioned the talisman, not explicitly, but even if he had spoken of the most lunatic aspect of his mission, she would have accepted that too. And if he'd said that he was going to bring back a foot-long butterfly and roast it in the oven, she'd have agreed to eat roasted butterfly. It would have been an ironic but a real agreement. In part, this showed the depth of her fear, that she would grasp at such straws. But she would grasp because at some level she knew that these were bricks, not straws. His mother had given him permission to go because somewhere inside her she too knew about the territories. Yeah. I love the idea of grasping at straws that are actually bricks. Like, it's just, again, just like the perfect words used in the perfect moment to really sell this idea of this realization that kind of, I think what King is trying to do here, and Straub, is on some level very functional, right? Because we need Lily to be okay with Jack leaving, right? Because we don't want to make this a story of like Morgan Sloat is chasing after him, but also so is his mother chasing after him. Like, that's not what the story is.
Yeah.
So we need her to be okay with that. And so he's kind of invented this brilliant way to be okay with it, which is on some level deep down in her, in a place that she doesn't even want to acknowledge. She knows all this is real, and she knows that this quest of his is real, and she knows that it can actually do something. And so she's going to let him do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's funny. We and others, mention the refusing the call part of the standard Campbellian story structure all the time, but I don't know if I've ever heard anyone say what it's for. And what it's for is dramatizing the fact that the call to adventure is a ridiculous, whoever is making the call to adventure is asking something ridiculous of you. They're asking you to do something dangerous or something that seems foolish, and that you would never normally do. And like, if they're just saying like, could you go to the store and get some milk? There's no refusal of the call because that's a fair request. If they're saying, I need you to go on a quest to destroy the ring, and it's you have to go to Mordor, it's like, oh my God, seriously? I really like desperately don't want to have to do that. And then and so you refuse the call, and then you realize like, actually I have to. And that's the drama of it. So it's not like there's a tendency to think of the Campbellian waypoints as just like perfunctory checkboxes, but this is an example here where part of the refusing the call moment in the story is him actually having to get his mom's buy-in as well, because it's like, yeah, this is a ridiculous thing for a mother to agree to, but she's gonna because it matters. Yeah.
No, I think you're right. I love it. I love it so much. And now we're finally done with the refusing the call phase, because Jack leaves now. He once again, for the last time, meets up with Speedy, who, fulfilling the wise old mentor role, gives Jack a couple of gifts before he goes on his journey. We see here that he gives him a road atlas, which will be very useful, and a guitar pick that he's supposed to show to the captain of the guards in the territories. So just some vague, like, this will be important in the future. Good luck.
Put this in your inventory.
Yeah. With that, he takes a sip of the special juice and leaves our world behind, crossing the threshold into something new. And our chapter ends with, long seconds before Jack opened his eyes, he knew from the richness and clarity of the smells about him that he had flipped into the territories. Horses, grass, a dizzying scent of raw meat, dust, the clear air itself. And that's the end of the chapter.
Yeah.
It's interesting that, like, we've talked about how the territories, everything is better, it's brighter, it's more pungent. But like, the dizzying smell of raw meat is an interesting choice there, right? It is something that is much more, it's a stronger smell, and it is much more, I don't want to say basic, but provincial, right? Like that typically in everyday life in America these days, we aren't around a lot of places where like raw meat is just hanging out and we can smell it.
Yeah, well, it's almost an edge of danger too. It's if it were just horses, grass, dust, the air, it would be like, oh, good. That's great. And it's like the first thing he smells when he crosses over, and we don't see what he's encountering is raw meat. We're like, wait a minute, like, is something bad happening? Did something just get killed? Did someone just get killed? Why is there a smell of raw meat? So
no, you're totally right, because I think one thing we need to make sure of is just because the territories are like, quote unquote, better or stronger or more powerful in the basic sense does not mean it's a place the danger doesn't exist. You know, like if the territories is the story land, if it's Narnia, if it's Midworld, the place of story, bad stuff happens in stories all the time, and that stuff is more pungent as well. So I think you're right. It leaves you with this okay, we're doing it, we're finally on our quest, but is it okay? Is everything okay?
Yeah, exactly.
Because the last time he flipped over, he didn't see anything. Right, it was just him and the ocean. But now there are horses here and dust. He feels and smells dust, so something kicked up some dust. Yeah, you're absolutely right that something has happened, and he hasn't quite opened his eyes yet.
We might be jumping into like an action scene, basically.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so we will move on to our last chapter of the week, which is our interlude. It is titled "Sloat in This World," with a 1 in parentheses next to it, which is in the world of Stephen King, a pretty big hint that there will be more chapters titled Sloat in this world. So I want to reiterate here, Matt, that I don't know anything about how this book was written beyond the cursory things we've already talked about. But I do think the interlude itself, from a style perspective, feels much more Stephen Kingian than the first 5 chapters. It feels like a much more traditional like way of writing for Stephen King.
Yeah, I agree with that. I just sort of the way it all hangs together, the prose style. Even the psychology of the character, he feels like a very Stephen King villain.
Yep.
Yeah.
So our introduction to Morgan Sloat here is with a wonderful little anecdote about how he took over as landlord of a new building, manipulated a poor Chinese family who owns a restaurant into paying 4 times the amount of rent that they were paying before by installing a key fence and making them basically almost driving them into bankruptcy. So what we're saying is here, he's a really good guy, right?
Oh yeah,
he's a really quality guy.
Just a stand-up fella.
You know, I mean, this is like really basic stuff, but I do think this is a really effective little vignette here. Like, this guy is a bastard. Like, this family did nothing to him except that they had a rent agreement with the previous landlord that was lower than Sloat would like, and so he's going to use everything in his power to manipulate them into paying more. So like it works. We get a immediate understanding of who this guy is as a person, and that allows us to explore him in more detail as the interlude goes on.
Yeah, and it's crucial that, you know, he's not just pressuring them. He's literally doing like illegal things to scare them into paying more.
Yeah. And it also says this line: he had done those things, but he hadn't exactly been Sloat when he did them. So the text just like drops this line and then immediately moves on, and everyone's like, "What?
Mm-hmm.
Huh?"
Yeah, right. It's funny because it doesn't really tell. Like, the first thought was like, does that mean that he's swapping with his twinner? Like his twinner is maybe even worse than he is, and he does these things, or you know, or maybe he can like meld with his twinner. I don't know.
Yeah, I think those are all reasonable hypotheses.
Mm-hmm.
These hypotheses, but yeah, the book doesn't give you anything there for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So in the opening scene, we see Morgan Sloat is talking to his son Richard. We haven't mentioned Richard very much, but we do know that like this was Jack's closest friend. That because their fathers were in business together, they hung out all the time, and Richard and Jack were very close friends. And Richard is off at a boarding school somewhere. But he's kind of talking to him about his attempts to get Lily to sign the company over here. And this is, I think, where it's first not directly stated, but very heavily implied here that Sloat was behind the accidental deaths of both Jack's father and his good college buddy, Tommy, who was serving as a lawyer to the talent agency they were running.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then, you know, I think we may have strongly suspected that already in the back of our mind, but now you're like, okay, this guy's actually a monster, and he may literally just decide that he needs to kill Jack to get this money.
Yeah. Also, from just a person that's read a lot of books, how many times has a hunting accident in a story actually just been a hunting accident?
Never, as far as I can recall.
Literally never.
Yeah.
We should write a story in which the big reveal is that it actually just was a hunting accident and there was no nefarious plot at all.
Yeah. The poor protagonist is like, oh, come on, please.
That can't be.
Yeah.
So just like a lot of Stephen King's complete asshole characters, I do think Sloat is very fascinating. We get this line here: Phil Sawyer had underestimated him, and that still rankled, because Phil had thought of him as sort of a trained rattlesnake to be let out of his cage, only under controlled circumstances. So had others. So we see here that this guy's got a chip on his shoulder, right? We learn a little bit about his past, that he met both Phil and Tommy at Yale, where they were all going to study theater. And everyone else around him seemed like the perfect rich kid, high class people that knew more about the world than he did, that had been to New York City and could talk about it. And I love the detail. What's your favorite part of New York City, Morgan? I like the downtown. I mean, it's like, I get why he went with it, because it's like a safe area. Uh-huh. Yeah, I just like the downtown area. Uh-huh. That's the part I like. Uh-huh. That part.
Yeah, that's great.
And there's this line that I really just love. The others made him feel like a clenched fist. Those morning bruises were shadowy little photographs of his soul. The others, all interested in the theater like himself and Sawyer, possessed good profiles, flat stomachs, easily careless manners, sprawled across the lounge chairs of the suite in Davenport, while Sloat, in a haze of perspiration, stood that he might not wrinkle his suit pants and thereby get a few more days' wear out of them. They sometimes resembled a gathering of young gods, cashmere sweaters draped over their shoulders like the golden fleece. They were on their way to becoming actors, playwrights, songwriters. Sloat had seen himself as a director, entangling them all in a net of complications and design which only he could unwind. Gosh, that's some good writing. The idea of them lounging on chairs like you get the gathering of young gods, whereas he is this kind of, tubby, shorter, poor, schlubby kind of guy.
Yeah.
And he's so resentful of it.
That's the main thing, right? It's such a fascinating and very succinct, actually, portrait of this character, this man who has no creative talent of his own, but massive inferiority complex and jealousy about that fact. And it leads him to despise the creative and the vibrant men around him out of jealousy.
Yeah.
But his reaction to this, instead of, trying to like become a better person or get skilled at something, he tries to just control them. And then I think, at least in a few instances, we see that controlling them isn't enough for them, and he ends up killing them because he's just this hateful, jealous human.
Yeah, you're totally right. I mean, we like he says here he goes there to be a director, and he directs like 2 plays while he's in school, and they're both terrible, and so he's not good at directing. But it's almost because like no director, like if you asked any like play or movie director, like what is the job of a director, no one's gonna say entangling them in a net of complications and designs which only he could unwind. Like that's a ridiculous way to look at directing. No, like directing is not about controlling and manipulating people. It's about having a vision and using the playwrights and the actors around you as tools to get that vision across, and working together and cooperating. But no, he sees it as this net. Like I love the description of directing as a net that you're trapping these performers in. That's absurd and ridiculous, but that's what he sees it as, and that's his whole view on life, is that he wants to build this net to control these people with.
Yeah, it's a great like evil destroys itself situation, because it's like he thinks that in order to be happy he needs to control everything around him, and it's like, well, that's going to lead to you being unsuccessful, actually.
Yeah And I love the detail here that like he sees Phil Sawyer and he immediately thinks, oh, this is just another rich kid, right? And we learn that Phil Sawyer actually isn't rich, that his family is not well off at all. And I love that. It's just like, you're absolutely right that these are people like just, very assured and talented and confident in who they are. And he, in the mind of Morgan Sloat, that equals rich, because that's what he wants. That's his definition of status, is richness. And so these are people that are perhaps rich in spirit, but not necessarily in money. But all he can attach to that kind of behavior is money, and he resents them for the money that he thinks they have, even though they don't.
Yeah, exactly.
We also learn here that one year a drunk Phil decides to show Morgan the territories, which bad move, Phil, bad move, because Morgan is immediately trying to figure out ways to exploit them, like bringing them technology, selling them weapons, becoming a weapons dealer. I do think this is the thing that King and Straub chose to do here, is it made the Sawyer Sloat business a talent agency. That was the first thing that they did together, was a talent agency. And that's really interesting because Sloat gets into different things with it. Obviously, he gets into real estate and finds ways of using the money they have to make more money. But that is, a talent agency is a kind of corroborative and protective role, like you're meant to help foster the career of your clients. You're meant to help them, get the best possible thing they can have. It's a very, it is not directing in any sense of the way. It is fostering. It is. I mean, you have to be ruthless in a lot of ways because that's the way the business works. But it doesn't make sense at all for a thing that Sloat is doing, which is not surprise. All it does is allow him to be close to successful people and therefore more and more resentful. Like you can see how the guy from college being in a business where he was helping the career of rich people get more rich and more famous became more and more resentful.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's supposed to be supportive, but he seems to be using it as an opportunity to be a parasite. He's feeding off of the talent of others. Absolutely. Because he has no talent himself, and is the kind of person who either can't see or like that. My take on characters like this is always like the flaw is that they don't realize that they need to find something that they're talented at. Like if they're jealous of talent, then maybe you don't need to be a director. Maybe there's something else that you can be good at. But they always just want to tear down the people who do have talent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But just by the way, just like the idea, the premise of a man who can step through a door into another world, getting drunk and accidentally telling his friend about it, like that's a great premise. Like I want to see that story. The idea of like that getting out of hand and him being like, ah, shit, I kind of regret telling my friend about this, but I can't take it back now. Like isn't that a great like seed for a story?
No, you're absolutely right. It is, and like you're very sympathetic to that because it's a thing that Phil Sawyer has probably been carrying his whole life, and I would want to tell other people about that too. I'd want to show, like, if I could go to another world, I would absolutely want to go, hey Matt, let's go hang out in this cool other world.
Yeah,
it'll be fun.
Yeah, and I promise that I wouldn't try to kill you.
I don't know if I believe that.
Well, I really
one thing's for sure,
though.
we're never going on a hunting trip together. That's for sure.
That's for sure.
And so our interlude here ends with a little king chasing the squirrel moment here a bit as we learn about an actor named Asher Dondorf, who was like a character actor who was mildly successful, had one big role, and the offers started kind of coming in, but he's kind of a pain in the ass, Matt, because like he sees himself as a star, but everyone else sees him as a character actor. So like he's being like too demanding and wanting too many things. And so our man Morgan Sloat here decides the best thing to do is to just arrange this man to kill himself. And so therefore he won't be a problem for him anymore. And this is like we begin the interlude on a moment of him fucking over this family that owns a Chinese food restaurant just because he wants a little bit more rent, even though he's already a multimillionaire. And we end it with him deciding to kill a man and make it look like a suicide merely for the fact that continuing to be his agent is kind of inconvenient for him.
Yeah. It's
just kind of a pain in the ass, and the guy annoys me. And so it's just easier for me to kill him.
Uh-huh.
It's like it's a wild moment that absolutely firmly establishes without a shadow of a doubt the level of depravity we have on display with this guy.
Yeah, we've got a real piece of work, as they say.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is the end of the interlude and the end of part 1. So here we go. Jack has crossed the threshold, is on his way. The bad guys know about it. Or, well, they don't know about it yet. But I think the other thing that we should talk about at the end of the interlude is it just randomly pops into Morgan's head that, if Jack has found out a way to get to the territories, I'm gonna kill him. I'm just going to kill that guy.
Uh-huh.
Just to be safe,
Yeah,
just to make sure.
Just to be safe.
Yeah.
Hey, Scott, we have gone on a fishing trip before, and you came back from it alive. So I just want people to know.
Look, Matt, nobody has a fishing accident, okay? And if they do, they just got like a fish hook in their eye. They're not dead.
Well, you'd call it a boating accident.
A boating accident.
Yeah. Well,
did we go out on a boat?
We did. We went on a boat.
What, a boat?
It's the Simpsons joke. Never mind. Yeah, we went on a boat, and it was me and two of our other friends, and we were all playing chicken to see who would admit to being seasick first. And neither of us lost that game, and that's all that matters.
That is that I won.
Mm-hmm.
That's because I wasn't seasick, Matt.
Oh, okay, yeah.
See, I'm still playing.
Neither was I.
So that is going to do it for our first episode of The Talisman. I don't know about you, Matt, but we've got 700 more pages to go in this book, and I think they're promising to be very, very fun and very well written. I think that's overall my takeaway from this first episode is I can't believe just how well written this book is. I shouldn't be surprised anymore, but it never ceases to amaze me when I really start to dig into the prose. Just this stuff is good. It's real good.
Yeah, really enjoying it.
Mm-hmm. All right. So a discussion question for next week, Matt. I think this is a perfectly fun Talisman themed question. What is it, Matt?
What's your favorite book written by more than one author and why?
I hope there's enough books written by more than one author for this to be a good question.
I mean, they're definitely always memorable in some way or another because it always ends up with a kind of unusual product, for better or worse.
Definitely. It's such a fun experiment, and I can't wait to talk about this one a little bit more. Yeah. So yeah, let us know what your favorite one is. If it's The Talisman, please don't put any spoilers in that answer.
Yeah.
But that is going to do it for us here this week. Next week, The Talisman continues as we begin part 2 titled The Road of Trials. We'll be discussing chapters 6 through 9 of the book. So make sure you get those read and be ready to report back to us next week.
Road of Trials. That is very Campbellian, isn't it?
It is indeed. I think literally.
Yeah.
That is literally one of the phases on the hero's journey.
I think so. But anyway, remember you can reach out to us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com, over on Twitter at kingslingerspod, and on r/doof media, particularly in the thread for this particular episode.
Absolutely. And if you are not already subscribed to Kingslingers, make sure you do it. Do it right now. Go. Hit the button. We are everywhere. We got an email from a listener earlier today asking us if we were on Stitcher. The answer to that question is yes. We are everywhere. The only one I'll say is, let's be honest here, folks, Google Play, it sucks.
Mm-hmm.
It not good. And for some reason, sometimes they just don't update our episodes. That's not anything we're doing. It's just their service is bad. So if you're using Google Play, use something else.
Yeah. It seems like a bad one.
It's really bad. Which, I mean, disappointing. Google. Yeah. Why?
I don't know. So anyway, if you like any of our shows and you want to support them, then don't use Google Play. And also consider donating to our Patreon account at patreon.com/doofmedia, because that is what convinces us to keep making more podcasts every week. Special thanks to new patrons Brooke J and Jacob M. Thank you so much. We hope you enjoy the cool stuff we have over on the Patreon. We just did a discussion of the Shining miniseries as a bonus podcast. We have so many of those bonus Stephen King adaptation podcasts now. I don't even know how many. It's got to be like at least 12.
It is at least 12. I believe it's 14, counting this month's.
Yeah. So that's and those are always really fun. That's like a good hour of us talking about a Stephen King adaptation, whether it be a good adaptation or a hilariously bad one. It's always a fun time. So thanks again, Brooke and Jacob, for convincing us to keep podcasting for just one more week.
I like this idea in your head that there's like a minimal target, and if we fall below, sorry, the podcast is canceled.
We're just always on a knife's edge, folks, and it's really you in particular who's going to be the one that pushes us on one more week.
Yeah, you do it.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, if you cannot afford to do it, that is absolutely okay. You can always help us out by sharing the podcast, and of course, by leaving a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. This week's Spotlight review comes from Gerardo, who is a name that sounds very familiar to me. I think that's one of our regular discussion question answerers. But Gerardo gives us 5 stars and says, a podcast duo with great analysis of King's texts. If gunslingers deal in death, then the Kingslingers are slaying it with a rich and full analysis of the text. This duo of podcasters do a thorough review of the Dark Tower series and some related works. Weekly episodes cover sections of reading, followed by a discussion of themes, character arcs, and story predictions, but never spoilers. Audience interactions occur via weekly discussion questions with responses posted online and read back in the next episode. The hosts have great rapport, one familiar with King's work and the other a king newbie, making the conversation easy and fun to listen to. I recommend to those who love Stephen King's works, Dark Tower fans, and especially those who tried to reach the tower but fell along the way. Read along with the Kingslingers for insights and find new depth to the texts. Wow, that was a really great review, Gerardo. Thank you so much. That's very kind of you.
Yeah, what a delightfully well-written review.
Yes, so good.
It's like an even better compliment because it's so well put together.
Absolutely. So thank you, Gerardo, and thank you to every one of you out there on all these platforms that have the ability to leave reviews and ratings. Thank you for doing that. We do really appreciate that. And finally, we are done with this episode. I can't believe this one went on so long. This is a one without discussion question answers, and yet we're still staring at 2 hours and 15 minutes. So we'll get better at this one day, but it's not going to be anytime soon.
That is not this day.
No. We'll see you back here next week as Traveling Jack truly begins to travel long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.